I shouldn't have chuckled. Specifically, I shouldn't have done that while Professor Ethan Angus was mid-sentence, explaining how his ancient heritage gave him the right to evaluate every woman in this lecture hall like a prize heifer at a county fair. The room was so silent you could hear the heartbeat of the girl next to me, but I just couldn't help it. My snort rang out, sharp and mocking, cutting through his low, predatory baritone. He stopped. His broad shoulders tensed under a charcoal suit that cost more than my entire tuition, and slowly, he turned toward me. Those eyes locked onto mine, and for a second, the air left the room. He didn't look like a teacher. He looked like a storm front, and I was standing in the middle of the field holding a lightning rod. Welcome back to Eliana's Romance Library, where the best stories are the ones we experience together. Before we get into this story, I want to know in the comments as you listen to this story or after you're done with it, who is your favorite character and why, or where you are listening from. And if you're craving more and can't wait for the next story, consider becoming a channel member. You'll unlock exclusive early access to all new uploads, plus custom loyalty badges that show off your status in the library. Now, let's get back to the story. Chapter 1. The Predator in Tweeds. Is something about my presence amusing to you, Ms. Boris? His voice was like velvet wrapped around a blade. He didn't even have to look at the seating chart to know my name. That was the first red flag. The second was the way the temperature in the room seemed to spike 10 degrees the moment he took a step toward my desk. "Not your presence, Professor," I said, leaning back and crossing my legs with a confidence I didn't entirely feel. My heart was thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but I'd die before I let him see a tremor. Just the syllabus. I signed up for Adboristy linguistics, not How to Groom a Royal Consort 101. Are we here to study phonetics, or are you just looking for someone to fetch your slippers in the moonlight? A collective gasp rippled through the hall. Nobody talked to Ethan Angus like that. He was a Lycan King, a man who ran a multi-billion-dollar empire when he wasn't busy being the apex predator of the Northern Hemisphere. He was supposed to be untouchable. Ethan reached my desk, leaning down until we were eye to eye. He smelled incredible. Sandalwood, rain, and something primal that made my skin tingle in a way that was strictly against my personal policy. He didn't look angry. He looked hungry. The Lycan monarchy has survived for 1,000 years because we value precision, Vivian, he whispered, loud enough for only me to hear. I am here because the modern world has forgotten how to recognize a true match. My test isn't about slippers. It's about finding the one soul capable of standing beside me without crumbling. Well, keep looking. I flicked a stray hair over my shoulder, offering him my most saccharine, devastating smile. I'm pretty sure I'm overqualified for the position of damsel. Besides, I have a midterm in macroeconomics. I don't have time for a fated destiny. He didn't blink. His gaze dropped to my lips for a fraction of a second, and the intensity of it felt like a physical touch. Then he straightened up, adjusting his cuffs with terrifying composure. He walked back to the podium, the chalk clicking rhythmically against the board as he wrote a single, jagged line. The first phase of the mate test is instinctual recognition, Ethan announced to the stunned class, his voice regaining its professional cool. It requires a specific frequency of compatibility. Most of you will pass the baseline, some will excel. He paused, turning his head just enough to catch my eye again. A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth, a cruel, beautiful expression that promised trouble. However, effective immediately, one student has already been disqualified. Ms. Boris, you have officially failed the opening requirement. Your temperament is incompatible with the crown. The class erupted into whispers. My face heated up, not with shame, but with pure, unadulterated fury. He was dismissing me? Before the semester even started? You can't fail me for having an opinion. I stood up, my chair screeching against the floor. Ethan gathered his leather satchel, looking utterly bored. I just did. You lack the grace, the silence, and the scent of a queen. You are a statistical anomaly, Vivian. A failure. He began to walk toward the exit, the lecture not even halfway over. Wait just a damn minute, I shouted, grabbing my bag and chasing after him. I followed him out into the hallway, my heels clicking furiously against the marble. You don't get to just walk away after insulting my DNA in front of 80 people. What exactly is this scent I'm missing? Is it lavender? Is it submission? Because I can buy the first one and you're never getting the second. Ethan stopped abruptly at the top of the grand staircase. I didn't have time to brake, slamming right into his back. It was like hitting a brick wall made of warm, living muscle. He spun around, catching me by the waist to steady me. His hands were huge, his fingers splayed across the small of my back, and the heat from his palms seared through my shirt. He pulled me flush against him, his face inches from mine. His eyes weren't gold anymore. They were a burning, molten amber. You want to know what you're missing, Vivian? He growled, his breath hot against my ear. You're missing the ability to stay away from me. He released me so suddenly I stumbled. Without another word, he descended the stairs, leaving me breathless and trembling in the hallway. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, seeing a notification from the university portal. Enrollment status: restricted. Please see Professor Angus in his private residence for remedial evaluation. He hadn't just failed me, he had trapped me. Chapter 2. Remedial Rebellion. I stared at the restricted status on my screen until the pixels started to blur. Remedial evaluation? At his private residence? If Ethan Angus thought he could use my GPA to blackmail me into some gothic romance audition, he had severely miscalculated. I wasn't the girl who swooned in the hallway. I was the girl who cited the university bylaws until the dean got a headache. I didn't go home to change into something compliant. Instead, I marched straight to the faculty housing district, a row of black iron gated estates that looked more like fortresses than professor pads. I reached the Angus Manor, a sprawling glass and stone architectural marvel that screamed, I have a hoard of gold and I'm not afraid to use it. I didn't knock. I hammered on the heavy oak door until a mechanical hum signaled the lock disengaging. You have 5 minutes to fix my enrollment status, Professor, or I'm calling the Board of Ethics. I barked as the door swung inward. Ethan wasn't wearing the charcoal suit anymore. He was draped in a silk black robe, loosely tied, revealing a chest that looked like it had been sculpted out of granite. He was holding a glass of amber liquid, looking entirely too relaxed for a man who had just nuked a student's academic future. You're late, Ms. Boris, he said, his voice dropping an octave as he scanned my thrift store jeans and combat boots. And you're shouting. A queen should know that a whisper carries more weight than a scream. I'm not a queen. I'm a linguistics major who needs your signature on a digital waiver. I stepped into the foyer, the air inside smelling of expensive leather and something dangerously masculine. What exactly is this remedial evaluation? Is there a quiz? A standardized test? Or are you just going to stare at me until I magically develop a submissive temperament? Ethan set his glass down on a marble console and began to walk toward me. Each step was slow, deliberate, and entirely predatory. The test is simple, Vivian. You claim my instincts are archaic. I claim your defiance is a mask. Oh, we are going to spend the evening determining who is lying. I'm not staying for the evening, I snapped, though my heart was doing a frantic tap dance against my ribs. I want my credits. Then prove me wrong, he whispered, stopping just inches from me. He didn't touch me, but the heat radiating from him was like a physical weight. Sit, eat. Let's discuss the phonetics of the Old Wolf dialects you so eloquently mocked in class. If you can make it through dinner without losing your temper, or your breath. I'll clear your restriction. Dinner? That's your grand plan? A dinner date disguised as a lecture? I let out a sharp, jagged laugh. You're not a king, Ethan. You're just a lonely academic with a god complex. His eyes flashed gold for a split second, a warning shot of the power he was holding back. It's not a date, Vivian. It's an autopsy of your soul. Now, the dining room is this way, unless, of course, you're afraid of what might happen when the lights go low. I should have walked out. I should have gone to the dean. But the way he looked at me, like I was the only puzzle he couldn't solve, sent a surge of adrenaline through my veins. I followed him, my chin held high. The dining table was set for two, lit by a dozen flickering candles. There was no violence, no threats, just the suffocating electric tension of two people who wanted to scream at each other and kiss each other in equal measure. As Ethan pulled out my chair, his fingers brushed my shoulder. The contact felt like a live wire hitting water. Start talking, Professor, I said, trying to keep my voice steady as I sat down. Explain to me how a linguistics degree correlates with your mate test. I'm dying to hear the logic. Ethan sat across from me, the candlelight dancing in his dark eyes. It's about resonance, Vivian. When a Lycan finds his match, the very frequency of their voice changes. It aligns. Yours, however. He paused, a smirk playing on his lips. Yours is a discordant symphony. It's irritating. It's loud. And yet, my wolf won't stop listening for it. He leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. Tell me, Vivian, do you feel the resonance, or are you going to keep pretending that your skin isn't humming right now? I opened my mouth to deliver a scathing rebuttal, to tell him he was delusional, but the words died in my throat. Because he was right. My skin was humming, and as a low, rumbling growl vibrated through the floorboards, a sound that didn't come from his throat, but from the very house itself, the front door burst open. A woman in a pristine white suit walked in, her eyes glowing a cold, piercing blue. Ethan, she said, her voice like ice, the council is here. They heard you found a failure, and they've come to see why you haven't disposed of her yet. Chapter 3. The Council's Shadow. The woman in white, Lady Angela, though I didn't know it yet, didn't even look at me. To her, I was furniture. To her, I was a smudge on the pristine glass of Ethan's reputation. Ethan didn't move. He didn't even stand up. He just swirled the ice in his glass, the clinking sound unnervingly loud in the sudden silence. I don't recall inviting the council to my private residence, Angela. Especially not during my office hours. Office hours? Angela's gaze finally flicked to me, her blue eyes scanning my face with the clinical detachment of a scientist looking at a failed experiment. Is that what we're calling this? You've restricted a human girl's education to lure her into your home because you're obsessed with a glitch in your own instincts. I am not a glitch, I said, standing up so fast my wineglass rattled. And I wasn't lured. I'm here under academic protest, which, by the way, is a violation of the student handbook, Professor. Angela let out a small, tinkling laugh that sounded like breaking glass. She's spirited. I see why she amused you for an afternoon, Ethan. But the bloodlines are restless. You promised a queen by the spring equinox. This person can't even shift. She can't even sense the scent of the high guard standing in your rose garden right now. Ethan's jaw tightened. The professor persona was slipping, replaced by something much darker and more regal. The high guard is in my garden? 6 of them, she replied smoothly. Waiting for your command to escort the failure back to the dorms and erase this little lapse in judgment from the records. We can't have the king's reputation tarnished by a linguistics project. I looked at Ethan, expecting him to snap back, to defend my right to be there, or at least my right to my own credits. Instead, he just stared at me, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched, becoming heavy and suffocating. "Is that true, Ethan?" I whispered, the humor finally drained from my voice. "Am I just a lapse in judgment? You are a complication." "Vivian," he said, his voice flat. He turned to Angela. "The council can wait in the library. I will finish my evaluation of Ms. Boris in private." "There is nothing to evaluate." Angela stepped closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. "She failed the markers. She's loud. She's human. And she's beneath you. Give her the waiver and let her go before the council decides to make her disappearance permanent." My blood ran cold. No physical violence, Ethan had promised, or implied, but the word disappearance didn't sound like a trip to the mall. I looked at the exit, then back at Ethan. He was standing now, his height dwarfing both of us. "Vivian," he said, his voice regaining that velvet-wrapped-in-steel quality. "Go to the library. Stay behind the oak doors. Do not speak. Do not laugh. Do not make a sound." "Like hell," I said, my fierce streak returning with a vengeance. "I'm not hiding in a library like a naughty child while you discuss my disposal with a bunch of guys in suits." "It's not a request," Ethan growled, and for the first time his shadow seemed to grow, stretching across the walls until it looked like a massive, hulking beast. "If they see you like this, defiant, screaming, beautiful, they won't just let you leave. They'll see you as a threat to the crown. Go. Now." I saw the flicker of genuine concern in his eyes, a crack in the kingly mask. I realized then that Ethan wasn't trying to hide me because he was ashamed. He was hiding me because he was terrified of what they would do if they realized he actually cared. I turned and bolted toward the library doors, my heart hammering. I ducked inside, pulling the heavy oak shut just as the front doors opened and a group of heavy, synchronized footsteps entered the foyer. I leaned my back against the door, breathing hard. The library was dim, filled with the scent of old parchment and Ethan. I moved toward the back, hiding behind a massive mahogany desk. As I crouched there, my hand brushed a hidden latch under the desk's edge. A small drawer popped open. Inside wasn't a syllabus or a grade book. It was a velvet box. I opened it, and my breath hitched. It was a ring, a heavy, ancient gold band topped with a raw, uncut emerald that seemed to glow with its own inner light. And resting underneath it was a handwritten note in Ethan's elegant, jagged script. "The test is a lie. She is the storm I've been waiting for. I will burn the council to the ground before I let them take her." Suddenly, and the library doors didn't just open, they were thrown off their hinges. But it wasn't Ethan who walked in. It was Angela, and she wasn't smiling anymore. "I knew you couldn't stay quiet, human. Now give me the ring, or I'll show you exactly what happens to failures who steal from kings." Chapter 4. The Emerald Gamble. Angela didn't just walk. She glided, her expression shifting from cold professional to something sharp and jagged. Her blue eyes were fixed on the ring in my hand, the glowing emerald that seemed to be pulsing in time with my own frantic heartbeat. I stood up, my back hitting the mahogany bookshelves, the scent of old paper and Ethan's cologne suddenly feeling like a cage rather than a comfort. "I didn't steal anything," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I slipped the ring into the pocket of my jeans, keeping my hand clamped over it. "I found it, in a drawer, which, for the record, shouldn't be unlocked if you're so worried about security in this house." "That ring belongs to the line of Angus," Angela hissed, her fingers curling into claws that looked entirely too much like she was preparing to pounce. "It is the heart of the monarchy. A human girl with a loud mouth and a failing grade has no right to touch it. Hand it over, and maybe I'll convince the council to let you walk out of here with your memories intact." "And if I don't?" I tilted my head, letting a smirk touch my lips. "What are you going to do, Angela? Ethan told me to stay in here. If you start a scene, he's going to know you broke his rules. And from what I've seen, the king doesn't like people who break his rules. I was bluffing, and we both knew it. Outside those oak doors, I could hear the low, rumbling voices of the council members. The air in the library was thick with the scent of ozone and ancient magic, a weight that made it hard to breathe. Angela took a step forward, her eyes glowing with a predatory light. "Ethan is distracted," she whispered. "He's busy convincing 6 elders that he hasn't lost his mind. He won't hear a thing." She lunged, not with a weapon, but with a speed that was purely supernatural. I didn't try to outrun her. I knew I'd lose. Instead, I grabbed a heavy, leather-bound volume of ancient lupine syntax from the desk and swung it with everything I had. It didn't hit her. She was too fast for that. But it knocked over a massive inkwell, splashing dark indigo liquid across the pristine white rug and her designer suit. "You little brat!" Angela screeched, stopping mid-motion to look at the stain. "Oops," I said, backing toward the rear of the library where a floor-to-ceiling window overlooked the dark gardens. "Maybe you should have tested for clumsiness in your queen markers. Now, about that ring, I think I'll keep it for a while. It's the only leverage I have to get my credits back." "You think this is a game?" She looked up, her face contorting with a snarl. "That ring reacts to the soul of the wearer. If you aren't the one, it will burn you. It will hollow you out until there's nothing left but ash." I felt a sudden searing heat in my pocket. My hand jerked back as the emerald began to glow through the denim of my jeans. It wasn't burning my skin, but it was vibrating. A low hum that matched the resonance Ethan had mentioned at dinner. It felt like a heartbeat. My heartbeat. "It's not hollowing me out," I whispered, pulling the ring back out. The green light was blinding now, illuminating the entire library. "It's singing." The library doors burst open again, and this time, it was Ethan. He looked like he'd just walked out of a war zone. His hair was disheveled, his robe was gone, and he was wearing a black tactical shirt that strained against his muscles. Behind him stood 3 gray-haired men in suits, their expressions carved from stone. They all stopped. Their eyes weren't on Ethan or Angela or the ink-stained rug. They were fixed on the glowing emerald in my hand. "Vivian," Ethan breathed, his voice a mix of terror and awe. "Put it down." "I can't," I said, my voice trembling as the light began to crawl up my arm like liquid fire. "It won't let go." One of the council elders stepped forward, and his eyes wide. "The heart of the North. It's recognizing a human?" "She's a thief!" Angela screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She stole it from the desk." "She didn't steal it," Ethan growled, stepping between me and the council, his body a living shield. "The drawer was locked with a blood seal. Only the king's mate can open it." He turned to look at me, his amber eyes searching mine. "Vivian, you failed the test. You failed every single marker I set." "I know," I whispered, the light now reaching my shoulder. "I'm a failure, remember?" "No," Ethan said, a slow, devastating smirk spreading across his face. "The test was wrong. I was looking for a subject." The ring. The ring was looking for a queen." The light suddenly surged, a wave of pure energy that knocked everyone in the room back. Except for me. I felt a surge of power, and a fierce, protective instinct that made me want to roar. But as the light faded, I saw the council members drawing closer, their faces dark with something that wasn't awe anymore. It was hunger. "If she is the one," the elder said, his voice cold and sharp, "then she must be taken to the High Temple for the blood trial. Immediately." Chapter 5. The High Temple's Invitation. "The blood trial? Absolutely not." Ethan's voice was a low vibration that seemed to rattle the books on the shelves. He didn't move an inch, his hand reaching back to grip my wrist. His skin was scorching, his pulse racing against mine. "It is the law, Ethan. the elder replied, stepping over the ink-stained rug. If a human triggers the heart of the North, she must prove her worthiness before the council. Or have you forgotten the last time a king tried to bypass the ancient rites? The pack nearly tore itself apart. She's a student, Ethan snapped, his eyes flashing dangerously. She has an exam on Monday. She isn't part of your political games. I'm standing right here, I interrupted, pulling my arm out of Ethan's grip and stepping around him. My heart was still pounding, and the ring in my hand felt heavy, like it had gained 10 pounds of solid gold. What exactly is a blood trial? Because if it involves actual blood, I'm out. I faint at paper cuts. Angela let out a jagged, bitter laugh. It's not your blood they want, you little fool. It's your spirit. They'll strip away your mind until there's nothing left but the raw instinct of a wolf. If you survive, you're a queen. If you don't, you're a vegetable. I looked at Ethan. He didn't deny it. His jaw was set so tight I thought his teeth might crack. Ethan, I whispered. Is she joking? Tell me she's joking. The trial is mental, Vivian, he said, his voice softening just for me. It's a psychic link to the collective consciousness of our ancestors. It's designed to test if a human mind can handle the weight of the Lycan bond. It's intense. But I won't let them take you. You don't have a choice, King, the elder said, 2 more council members stepping into the room. They were massive men, their presence filling the space until the library felt like a closet. The ring is active. The bond is forming. If she stays in this house without the trial, the power will consume her. Look at her hand. I looked down. Fine. Glowing green veins were starting to spiderweb across my skin, originating from the emerald. It didn't hurt, but it felt busy. Like 1,000 tiny needles were knitting themselves into my DNA. I can help her, Ethan said, his voice desperate. I can stabilize the bond. By yourself? Angela stepped forward, her blue eyes icy. You're already halfway compromised by your own attraction to her. You'll kill her trying to save her. The temple is the only way. I looked at the men in suits, then at the furious, beautiful king standing in front of me. I thought about my linguistics thesis. I thought about my quiet life in the dorms. And then I thought about the way Ethan had looked at me when he said I was a discordant symphony. Fine, I said, my voice clear and loud. I'll do the trial, on one condition. The elder raised an eyebrow. A human making conditions? Amusing. Fix my GPA, I said, pointing a finger at Ethan. And give me an A in Boris linguistics. If I'm going to have my brain scrambled by a bunch of dead wolves, I'm at least getting a 4.0 out of it. The room went silent. Ethan let out a huff of laughter, a genuine, surprised sound that made my heart skip a beat. Vivian, you are truly impossible. I'm fierce, remember? I winked at him, though my knees were shaking. Now, let's get this over with. I have a midterm I actually need to study for. Very well, the elder said, gesturing toward the door. The transport is waiting. Ethan, you will remain here. The trial is for the candidate alone. The hell I will, Ethan growled, but before he could move, the 2 council members stepped in front of him. They didn't draw weapons. They didn't need to. Their combined alpha energy was like a physical wall. Ethan, stay, I said, looking back at him. I've been handling myself since I was 16. I don't need a king to hold my hand for a mental test. Just make sure there's a pizza and a bottle of wine waiting for me when I get back. Ethan looked like he wanted to roar, to tear the house down to keep me there, but he slowly nodded. The library doors will be open, Vivian. Always. I walked out of the house, flanked by the council and into the back of a blacked-out SUV. As we drove away from the estate, the glowing veins on my arm began to pulse faster. The elder sitting across from me watched my skin with a hungry intensity. You know, Ms. Boris, he said quietly as we pulled up to a massive ancient stone structure hidden in the woods. Most humans don't even make it past the first gate. The test Ethan gave you? That was the easy part. The ancestors, they don't like failures. The car stopped. The doors opened to a cold, misty clearing. I stepped out, the emerald ring suddenly burning cold in my hand. "Welcome to the High Temple," the elder said, gesturing toward a dark, yawning archway. "Enter, and face the king's predecessors." I took a deep breath, adjusted my bag, and walked into the dark. But as the heavy stone doors slammed shut behind me, a voice whispered in the shadows, a voice that sounded exactly like Ethan's, but colder. "Run, Vivian. They didn't bring you here to test you. They brought you here to break the bond." Chapter 6. The Labyrinth of Echoes. The voice wasn't coming from the air, it was coming from inside my head. The emerald on my finger flashed a warning red, and I stumbled, my boots slipping on the damp stone floor. The door behind me was a solid slab of granite, no handles, no hinges. I was trapped in a room that smelled of incense, old bone, and something metallic that made my tongue go dry. "Ethan?" I whispered, my voice echoing off the high, vaulted ceiling. "If that's you, now would be a great time for some of those ancient markers to kick in." No answer. Only the sound of dripping water and my own shallow breathing. I started to walk, my hand grazing the rough-hewn walls. The temple was a maze of narrow corridors and vast, silent chambers. Every few feet, a torch would flare to life as I passed, the flames blue and silent. I felt like I was being watched. Not by one person, but by hundreds. The ancestors. "Okay, ancestors," I shouted, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and defiance. "I'm here. I'm human. I'm a linguistics major. I can tell you exactly why your ancient dialects are structurally flawed if you want to play that way. Let's get the trial started." Suddenly, the floor beneath me vanished. I didn't fall through space. I fell through memories. I saw Ethan, not the polished professor, but a younger version of him, standing over a fallen wolf in a snowy field. He wasn't violent. He was grieving. I felt his crushing loneliness, the weight of a crown he never asked for, and the desperate hope he felt the moment I laughed in his lecture hall. It was an emotional tidal wave. His desire for me wasn't just physical, it was a soul-deep recognition of the one person who wasn't afraid to tell him no. "Focus, Vivian," the voice whispered again. It was Ethan's voice, but layered, like a chorus. "They are trying to drown your identity in my history. You have to find the discordant note. You have to be the noise." I gasped, my lungs burning as if I were underwater. I closed my eyes, blocking out the images of Ethan's past. I thought about my favorite coffee shop. I thought about the time I corrected my third-grade teacher on the spelling of onomatopoeia. I thought about the way I felt when Ethan looked at my lips, that fierce, stubborn spark of mine that had nothing to do with fated destiny and everything to do with choice. "I am Vivian Boris," I screamed into the void, "and I don't belong to your history." The vision shattered like glass. I found myself standing in a circular room filled with shimmering, translucent figures. They were the former kings and queens, and they were staring at me with expressions of pure disdain. "A human heart is a fragile thing," one of the figures said, her voice 1,000 whispers. "It cannot hold the weight of the North. Give us the ring, child, and we will let you sleep." "I'm not tired," I said, stepping into the center of the circle. The emerald was glowing white now, the light so intense it felt like it was carving its way into my bones. "And I'm not giving you anything. This ring chose me. Ethan chose me, and I chose to follow him into this creepy basement." "That's 3 for 3. I think that's a pass." The figures began to circle me, their movements blurring until they were a whirlwind of gray and silver. The pressure in my head was building. a high-pitched whine that made my ears bleed. "You are a failure," they chanted. "Incompatible. Weak. Human." "I am fierce," I whispered, my knees buckling. "I am sassy. And I am really, really annoyed." I reached out, not with my hands, but with my mind, grabbing onto that resonance Ethan had talked about. I found the frequency of his voice in my head, and I twisted it, turning it into a shout that matched their chant. The room exploded in a burst of green and white light. When my vision cleared, the figures were gone. The room was empty, save for a single stone pedestal in the center. Resting on the pedestal was a small clay bowl filled with a shimmering silver liquid. "The final step," a new voice said. It wasn't Ethan's. It was the elder from the SUV, standing in the doorway I hadn't noticed before. "Drink the essence of the pack, Vivian Boris. If your human heart survives the transition, you will be queen. If not..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I walked toward the pedestal, my hand trembling as I reached for the bowl. The silver liquid looked like liquid moonlight. I could feel Ethan's presence at the edge of my mind, a frantic, desperate pull. He was trying to get in, but the temple walls were too thick. I picked up the bowl. I looked at the elder, who was smiling a thin, cruel smile. "Wait," I said, pausing with the bowl at my lips. "This stuff, is it gluten-free?" The elder's smile vanished. "Drink." I tilted the bowl back. The liquid tasted like ice and fire, like every emotion I had ever felt multiplied by 1,000. I felt my heart stop. I felt my soul stretch until it felt like it was going to snap. And then I felt the wolf. Not a monster, not a beast, but a fierce, protective spirit that wrapped itself around my human heart like a shield. It wasn't Ethan's wolf. It was mine. I dropped the empty bowl, the clay shattering on the stone floor. I stood tall, the green veins on my arm now solid gold, my eyes glowing with a light that made the elder flinch. "Evaluation complete," I said, my voice resonating with a power that made the very air vibrate. I passed, but as I turned to leave, the elder didn't move out of the way. He pulled a small silver whistle from his pocket and blew it. No sound came out, but the shadows in the room began to move. "You passed the trial of the ancestors," the elder said, his voice trembling with rage, "but you haven't passed the trial of the council, and we have no intention of letting a human sit on the throne." The shadows coalesced into 6 massive black-furred wolves, their eyes red with a mindless, drugged rage. They weren't Lycans, and they were berserkers, wolves who had lost their humanity, and they were blocking the only exit. "Ethan!" I screamed into my mind, hoping the bond was finally strong enough. "If you can hear me, I think I need that pizza now. And maybe some backup." A massive golden-furred wolf burst through the ceiling, falling like a meteor into the center of the room. It was Ethan. He was huge, his fur shimmering with royal power, his eyes fixed on the berserkers with a promise of total annihilation. But as he landed, I saw the collar around his neck, a silver-spiked band that was glowing with a sickly purple light. He didn't growl at the berserkers. He turned, his teeth bared, and growled at me. Chapter 7. The Spiked King. Ethan didn't look like my professor anymore. He didn't even look like the king who had shared a quiet, tense dinner with me. The golden-furred beast standing between me and the exit was a nightmare of muscle and misplaced rage. The silver-spiked collar around his neck pulsed with a sickly violet light, digging into his fur with every ragged breath he took. His eyes, usually a warm molten amber, were clouded over with a hazy purple film. He was looking at me, but he wasn't seeing me. "Ethan, stop," I whispered, my voice echoing in the sudden, terrifying silence of the High Temple. "It's Vivian, the discordant symphony, remember? The girl who thinks your ancient dialects are a mess?" He let out a low, chest-vibrating snarl that made the stones beneath my boots tremble. He crouched low, his massive claws gouging deep furrows into the granite floor. He was preparing to spring, and I was the only target in the room. The council elder leaned against the far wall, crossing his arms with a smug, satisfied expression. The maddening shackle is a relic of the old wars, Ms. Boris. It turns the king's own protective instincts against the thing he values most. To him, you aren't a mate right now. You're a parasite draining his power, and a king must always prune the weeds. "You're a coward!" I shouted, the gold veins on my arm flaring with a sudden, indignant heat. "You couldn't break me with your dead ancestors, so you're making him do your dirty work?" "I'm ensuring the purity of the throne," the elder replied coldly. "Ethan, finish it." With a roar that shook the very foundation of the temple, Ethan lunged. He was a blur of gold and teeth. I didn't have a weapon, and I certainly didn't have the strength to fight a 600-pound apex predator. But I had the ring, nay, and I had the resonance. As he soared through the air, I didn't dive for cover. I stepped forward. I reached out with the hand wearing the emerald and slammed it directly onto the glowing purple collar as he collided with me. The impact was like being hit by a freight train. We went down together, sliding across the stone floor in a tangle of limbs and fur. His weight was crushing, his teeth inches from my throat. But I didn't let go of the collar. The emerald began to scream, a high-pitched melodic vibration that sliced right through the purple haze. "Ethan, listen to me!" I screamed, my face pressed against his warm, musk-scented fur. "I'm not a weed. I'm the storm. And you're the only one who can handle me." The violet light in the collar flickered. Ethan's jaw snapped shut just an inch from my jugular. His body convulsed, his muscles locking up as the emerald's green light fought the shackle's purple poison. It was a war of frequencies, and I was the conductor. I channeled every ounce of my fierce, stubborn independence into that ring. I thought about how much I hated being told what to do. I thought about how much I wanted to see him back in that charcoal suit, looking at me with that arrogant, beautiful smirk. The collar cracked. A spiderweb of white light fractured the silver spikes, and with a final booming pop, the violet glow vanished. Ethan's weight shifted. The terrifying tension in his body evaporated, and he slumped over me, his head resting on my shoulder. His breathing was heavy, ragged, but the growling had stopped. Slowly, the golden fur began to recede, the massive paws shrinking back into human hands. "Vivian?" His voice was a broken rasp. He was shivering, his skin slick with sweat as he shifted back into his human form, naked and vulnerable amidst the wreckage of the temple floor. He looked up at me, his eyes finally clear, finally amber. You broke it," he whispered, his hand shaking as he touched my cheek. "I told you," I panted, trying to ignore the fact that the King of the North was currently using me as a mattress. "I'm overqualified for damsel." "Enough," the elder's voice boomed. He looked at the shattered collar, his face turning a bruised shade of purple. "The berserkers, tear them both apart." The 6 black-furred wolves, who had been watching the struggle with mindless intensity, suddenly snarled in unison. They began to circle us, their red eyes glowing with a drug-induced bloodlust. Ethan tried to stand, but he was too weak from the transition. He reached for me, his fingers locking with mine. "Vivian, run," he wheezed. I can't hold them off like this." "We aren't running," I said, standing up and pulling him with me. I felt the gold veins on my arm pulse one last time, a final surge of power from the temple's essence. "We're leaving, and we're taking the car." I looked at the emerald ring. It was glowing with a steady, calm light now. I didn't know how to use it, but I knew what it wanted. It wanted its king. I pressed my palm to Ethan's chest, right over his heart, and whispered the one word that had been echoing in my head since I drank the silver liquid. Command. A shockwave of pure, golden authority erupted from the ring. It didn't hit the wolves. It hit the very air around them. The berserkers didn't attack, and they didn't even snarl. They dropped to their bellies, their tails tucked, whimpering in the presence of a power they couldn't comprehend. The elder froze. He looked at the cowering wolves, then at me, then at the king, leaning on my shoulder. "The trial is over," I said, my voice carrying a weight that made the stone walls hum. And guess what? We both passed. Chapter 8. The Price of the Crown. The SUV ride back to the estate was the quietest 30 minutes of my life. Ethan sat in the back seat wrapped in a heavy wool blanket the council's driver had practically thrown at him in terror. I sat next to him, my hand still locked in his. The gold veins on my arm had faded back to faint, shimmering lines, but the ring felt like it was now a permanent part of my soul. We pulled up to the manor, to the glass and stone reflecting the first pale rays of dawn. The high guard were gone. The council members had vanished into the shadows, likely scrambling to figure out how a linguistics major had just dismantled their most ancient failsafe. Ethan didn't speak until we were inside the foyer and the heavy oak doors were safely locked. He leaned against the marble console, the blanket draped over his shoulders like a tattered royal robe. He looked exhausted, haunted, and entirely too handsome for someone who had just survived a psychic lobotomy. "You should leave, Vivian," he said softly, not looking at me. "Excuse me?" I dropped my bag on the floor, the thud echoing in the empty hall. "I just faced down your dead ancestors, broke a cursed collar with my bare hands, and saved your life from 6 rabid wolves. And you're giving me the 'you should leave' speech? Is this the part where you tell me it's for my own good?" "It is for your own good," Ethan snapped, finally looking at me. His eyes were bright with a mix of anger and something that looked suspiciously like tears. "The council won't stop. They've seen what you can do. They've seen that you can override the king's authority. You aren't just a candidate anymore, Vivian. You're a target. As long as you're with me, you're in the center of a war you never asked to fight." "I asked for an A in your class, Ethan." I stepped into his space, poking a finger into his chest. "I asked for my credits. And somewhere between the coffee shop and the blood trial, I decided I also wanted the arrogant jerk who thinks he can decide what's best for me." Ethan let out a ragged laugh, catching my hand and holding it against his heart. "I am an arrogant jerk, and you are the most infuriating woman I have ever met." "Good. Then we're even." I leaned my forehead against his. "Now tell me the truth. Without the kingly mask, without the royal duty, why do you want me to leave?" "Because I love you," he whispered, the words hitting me like a physical blow. "And if anything happens to you because of this crown, there won't be enough left of me to rule. I'll burn it all down, Vivian. Everything." The air in the foyer suddenly felt thick, charged with the kind of intimacy that doesn't need words. He pulled me closer, his arms wrapping around me, the wool blanket falling to the floor. For a long moment, we just stood there, 2 people caught in a storm of their own making. "Then don't let anything happen," I said into his chest. "You're the king. Start acting like it. Rewrite the rules. Fire the council. Hire some guards who aren't drugged-out wolves. And for the love of everything, get some better security on your desk drawers." Ethan pulled back, a genuine smirk finally touching his lips. "You really think it's that easy?" "I think I'm a fierce female who just passed a test designed to kill me," I said, tossing my hair back. "I think easy is whatever we decide it is." He leaned down, his lips hovering just a breath away from mine. "I suppose I could start by making you my official academic advisor." "With a very high salary," I added. "And a private office," he murmured, Next to yours. He finally closed the gap, his kiss tasting of salt, fire, and a promise that had nothing to do with fate. It was a choice. My choice. His choice. But as his hand slid down to my waist, the house's security system began to wail. A high-pitched, piercing alarm that cut through the romantic haze like a serrated blade. Ethan pulled back, his eyes flashing gold. He tapped a command into the console on the wall, and the security feed flickered to life. The front gates of the estate were being torn off their hinges. But it wasn't the council. It wasn't the High Guard. It was a fleet of black helicopters, bearing a logo I recognized from my linguistics textbooks. The mark of the Global Supernatural Oversight Agency. Ethan, I whispered, watching the screens as armored figures began to fast rope onto the lawn. Who are they? The people who make the council look like kittens, Ethan said, his voice grim. He looked at me, a flash of pure panic in his eyes. Vivian, the ring. Did you hide the resonance? I don't know how. They aren't here for the king, Ethan said, grabbing my hand and pulling me toward the back of the house. They're here for the human who triggered a level 10 magical event. They're here to contain you. Chapter 9. The Extraction. Contain me? I'm not a hazardous material, I shouted, stumbling as Ethan dragged me through the darkened hallways toward the estate's underground garage. The sound of the helicopters was deafening now, the rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of the blades vibrating through the glass walls. To them, you are, Ethan replied, his voice tight. The GSOA doesn't care about Lycan politics or fated mates. They care about anomalies. A human girl wielding the heart of the North is the biggest anomaly of the decade. We burst into the garage, a cavernous space filled with sleek, high-performance cars. Ethan didn't head for the SUV. He went straight for a custom-built matte black sports car that looked like it belonged in a stealth hangar. He threw open the passenger door and shoved me inside. Stay down, he commanded, sprinting to the driver's side. Wait, my bag. My thesis is in there. I scrambled to sit up, but the car roared to life with a sound like a hungry dragon, pinning me back against the leather seat. I'll buy you a new thesis, Vivian. Right now, I need to get you across the state line. Their jurisdiction is limited once we hit the neutral territories. He slammed the car into gear and floored it. We blasted through the garage doors just as the first armored figures hit the driveway. I caught a glimpse of them in the side mirror, men in high-tech tactical gear carrying strange glowing canisters instead of rifles. What are those? I pointed at the mirrors. Nullifiers, Ethan grunted, swerving the car around a fountain as we headed for the back gate. If they get close enough to trigger them, the ring will shut down, and your nervous system might go with it. The bond isn't stable enough for a hard disconnect. Great. Fantastic. This is definitely better than the midterm, I muttered, gripping the door handle so hard my knuckles turned white. We cleared the back gate just as a spotlight swept over the car. Ethan didn't look back. He pushed the car to its limit, the needle on the speedometer climbing into territories I didn't know existed. We were a black blur on the winding forest road, the trees whipping past like shadows. Ethan, I said, looking at the emerald ring on my finger. It was pulsing a frantic, rhythmic red. The ring. It's doing something. It's getting hot. Ethan glanced down, his face paling. It's a tracker. The GSOA has the frequency. They're locking onto you. Can we turn it off? Only if we break the bond, and we already established that might kill you. He reached over, taking my hand and squeezing it. Don't panic. I have a safe house in the mountains. It's shielded against every frequency known to man. We just have to get there. The road narrowed as we began to climb. The helicopters were still behind us, their searchlights cutting through the canopy like laser beams. I looked at the GPS on the dashboard. We were miles away from the neutral territories. They're gaining on us, I said, my voice trembling. Ethan, the car. It's slowing down. Ethan cursed, punching the steering wheel. They're using an EMP field. The car's electronics are failing. The engine sputtered and died. We drifted to a stop on a lonely, moonlit bridge over a rushing mountain river. The silence that followed was terrifying. Then, the sound of the helicopters returned, louder than ever. Ethan didn't hesitate. He stepped out of the car, pulling me with him. We stood on the edge of the bridge, the wind whipping my hair across my face. "We have to jump," Ethan said, his eyes scanning the dark water below. "Jump? Into a river? In the dark?" I looked at the drop. It had to be at least 50 feet. "I'm a linguist, Ethan. Not a stunt double." "I'll catch you," he said, his voice calm, steady, and filled with that absolute authority. "The water is deep enough. We can lose the scent in the current. Trust me, Vivian." He looked at me, his amber eyes glowing with a fierce, protective love. I looked at the helicopters cresting the ridge, their spotlights locking onto us. "If we survive this, you are so fired," I whispered. "I look forward to the severance package," he replied with a wink. He grabbed my waist, pulled me tight against his chest, and stepped off the ledge. We fell into the darkness, the air whistling past us, the cold water rushing up to meet us. But just before we hit the surface, the emerald ring let out a blinding flash of white light. I didn't feel the impact. I didn't feel the cold. I felt a voice, a deep, ancient roar that didn't come from Ethan or the ancestors. It came from the river itself. And when I opened my eyes, we weren't in the water. We were standing in a sun-drenched meadow, surrounded by towering peaks that looked like they were made of crystal. Ethan was still holding me, but he looked different. His eyes were no longer amber. They were white. And standing in front of us was a woman who looked exactly like me, except her hair was made of starlight, and her eyes were the color of the emerald. "Welcome home, Vivian," she said, her voice echoing in my soul. "We've been waiting for the failsafe to trigger." I looked at Ethan, then at the woman, then at my own hands. I wasn't human anymore, but I wasn't a Lycan either. "Who are you?" I whispered. The woman smiled, and as she did, the crystal mountains began to hum. "I am the original queen, and you aren't a failure, Vivian. You're the reboot." Behind us, the meadow began to ripple like a mirage. I saw the bridge, the helicopters, and the armored men, but they were frozen in time, like a photograph. "The bond is broken," the woman said, her smile fading. "And now, you have to decide. Do you save the king, or do you save the world?" Chapter 10. The Reboot Paradox. "Save the world or save the king?" I repeated, my voice flat. I looked at the woman made of starlight, then at Ethan, who was standing beside me like a frozen statue, his eyes glowing a haunting, vacant white. That is the most cliché, overused ultimatum in the history of narrative tropes. Can I get a third option? Maybe one where I get to keep my boyfriend and everyone else just minds their own business? The Starlight Queen, or whatever she was, didn't laugh. Her expression remained as still as the crystal peaks surrounding us. "The failsafe was triggered because the Lycan line has become stagnant, Vivian. The mate test Ethan used was a symptom of a dying system. You weren't supposed to pass it. You were supposed to break it." "Mission accomplished," I snapped, stepping toward Ethan. I reached out to touch his chest, but my hand passed right through him like he was made of smoke. My heart plummeted. "Ethan, can you hear me?" "He is in the in-between," the woman said. "He is the anchor. If you choose to save the world, the resonance you carry will reset the supernatural balance. The GSOA, the Council, the Berserkers, they all lose their power. Peace through neutralization, but the anchor must stay here to hold the gate shut. He remains in the crystal, and you go back to your linguistics thesis." I looked at the frozen scene behind us, the black helicopters suspended in mid-air, the GSOA agents like plastic soldiers. My life was back there. My boring, safe, 4.0 GPA life. I could go back to being just Vivian Boris, the girl who was too smart for her own good. And the king option? I asked, my voice trembling. You use the heart of the North to pull him out. You keep the bond. But the power surge will blow the gate wide open. The GSOA will have their anomaly. They will hunt you both until there is nowhere left to hide. You will be royals without a kingdom, running from a world that fears what you've become. I looked back at Ethan. Even frozen, even wide-eyed and ghostly, he looked like the only thing in the universe that made sense to me. He was the man who had challenged me, protected me, and ultimately trusted me to be his equal. He called me a discordant symphony, I whispered, a fierce, hot tear tracking down my cheek. He didn't want a quiet world. He wanted the noise. I didn't wait for the Starlight Queen to give me permission. I turned my back on the peaceful reset and slammed my hand into the crystal ground beneath Ethan's feet. The emerald ring erupted with a violent, blinding green light. Not the steady glow of the temple, but a jagged, electric emerald that looked like lightning. Ethan Angus, wake up! I screamed. You owe me a pizza and a very long explanation about why your ancestors are so dramatic. The crystal ground shattered. The white light in Ethan's eyes bled into amber, and suddenly, he wasn't smoke anymore. He lunged forward, his solid, heavy warmth colliding with me as the meadow dissolved into a whirlwind of colors. Vivian, he gasped, his arms locking around me with a strength that bruised. I chose the noise, Ethan. I panted into his neck. I hope you're ready for the fallout. The world snapped back like a rubber band. The cold mountain air hit us with the force of a physical blow. We were back on the bridge, the rushing river below us, the helicopters above. But something was different. The EMP field hadn't just died, it had reversed. The helicopter's electronics flickered and died. The searchlights went dark. The GSOA agents on the ropes began to slide down too fast, their descent equipment failing. Ethan pulled me toward the dark woods at the edge of the bridge. The reboot, he whispered, looking at the glowing gold lines on my arms. You didn't just save me, you claimed the power. We need to go, I said, my fierce energy returning with a vengeance. Now, while they're rebooting their own systems. We vanished into the trees just as the first GSOA agent hit the pavement. Behind us, a roar echoed from the river, a sound that wasn't a wolf and wasn't a human. It was the sound of a new world waking up. Chapter 11. The Midnight Pact. We ran until the sound of the helicopters was a distant, frustrated hum. The forest was dense, the ancient pines acting as a natural shield against thermal imaging. Ethan led the way, his movements fluid and silent, while I struggled to keep up, my combat boots slipping on the pine needles. We eventually found a small, hidden cave behind a waterfall, a classic Lycan hideout, according to Ethan. He helped me inside, his hands lingering on my waist. The adrenaline was finally starting to recede, leaving me shaking and freezing. You chose me, Ethan said, his voice low and thick with emotion. He was looking at me in the dim light of the cave, his amber eyes glowing with an intensity that made my breath catch. You could have had your life back. You could have ended the war. I told you, I'm overqualified for being a bystander, I said, trying to summon a witty remark. But it came out as a shiver. Ethan didn't say a word. He pulled me into his arms, wrapping his warmth around me like a shield. The GSOA won't stop, Vivian. They saw the flash. They know the heart of the North isn't just a myth anymore. They'll escalate. Let them, I said, leaning my head against his chest. We have the ring. We have whatever I am now. And we have the fact that you're the most stubborn man on the planet. And you're the most reckless woman, he countered, a small smirk playing on his lips. He pulled back, his expression turning serious. The bond is different now. It's not just a connection. It's a shared consciousness. I can feel your heart beating, Vivian. I can feel your thoughts. Then you know I'm thinking about how much I want to punch that council elder, I muttered. Ethan chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through my bones. We'll get to him. But first, we need to stabilize you. The reboot didn't just save me, it integrated the Emerald's core into your nervous system. You aren't just wearing the ring, Vivian. You are the ring. I looked down at my hand. The emerald was gone. In its place, a perfect-ish glowing green iris had formed in the center of my palm. It didn't hurt, but it felt alive. Great, I sighed. I'm a human glow stick. This is going to make dating very awkward. You aren't dating anyone else, Ethan growled, his possessive streak flaring. He caught my hand, his thumb stroking the glowing mark. You are the queen of the north, my queen. He leaned down, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss that tasted of ancient pine and modern rebellion. It was a promise, a pact made in the dark of a cave while the world hunted us. But as his hand slid into my hair, pulling me closer, I felt a sharp, icy tingle at the base of my skull. It wasn't the bond, it was an external intrusion. Ethan, I whispered, pulling back. Something's wrong, the waterfall. It's stopping. We both turned to look at the cave entrance. The roaring curtain of water was freezing in midair, turning into a wall of jagged ice. And standing on the other side of the ice, silhouetted by the moonlight, was Angela. She wasn't wearing her white suit. She was wearing tactical black, and her eyes weren't blue anymore. They were the same sickly violet as the king's spiked collar. Did you really think the GSOA was the only one with high-tech toys? She asked, her voice vibrating through the ice. The council has a new benefactor, Ethan, and they've authorized me to decommission the anomaly. She raised her hand, and the ice wall shattered into 1,000 deadly shards. Chapter 12. The Cold Extraction. Ethan threw himself over me, his body acting as a human shield as the ice shards peppered his back. He let out a grunt of pain, his grip on me tightening. "Stay behind me," he roared, his body beginning to shift. But the transition was slow, jagged. The maddening shackle might have been broken, but the violet energy Angela was radiating was acting like a localized dampener. "Your king is a relic, Vivian," Angela said, stepping into the cave. She was holding a small silver cylinder that was emitting a high-frequency hum. "The future of the Lycan race isn't fated mates and ancient emeralds. It's controlled evolution." "You're working for the council?" I shouted, peering over Ethan's shoulder. "The same people who tried to have you replaced?" "I'm working for the people who pay the best," she shrugged, her violet eyes fixed on the mark in my palm. "The GSOA wants you alive for study. The council wants you dead for stability. My new friends? They just want the power source. And they don't care if the host survives the extraction." She pressed a button on the cylinder, and a wave of violet energy blasted through the cave. Ethan collapsed to his knees, his golden fur receding as he gasped for air. The dampener was cutting him off from his wolf. I felt the mark in my palm begin to burn. It wasn't the singing heat of the temple. It was a tearing, agonizing pain. "Leave him alone," I screamed, lunging at Angela. She caught me by the throat with one hand, her strength supernatural and cold. She slammed me against the cave wall, the silver cylinder hovering inches from my palm. "You're a brave little human, Vivian," she whispered, her face inches from mine. "But bravery doesn't rewrite biology. This is going to hurt. A lot." "Vivian." "No," Ethan whispered, trying to crawl toward us, in his fingers clawing at the stone floor. I looked at Ethan, then at the glowing cylinder. I felt my fierce, defiant spark flare up one last time. If they wanted the power, I was going to give it to them. All of it. "You want the anomaly?" I spat, a bloody smirk touching my lips. "Then take the whole dose." I didn't pull my hand away. I grabbed the cylinder with my marked palm and pushed. I opened the floodgates of the heart of the North, dumping every ounce of the emerald's integrated energy into the Council's tech. The cylinder couldn't handle the surge. It began to glow white, then red, then a blinding, searing gold. "What are you doing?" Angela screamed, trying to pull away. But the mark in my palm was acting like a vacuum, locking her hand to mine. "I'm failing your test, Angela," I yelled over the rising roar of the energy. "I'm discordant, remember?" The explosion didn't just clear the cave, it leveled the entire mountain slope. When the light faded, I was lying on the ground, my head spinning, my hand smoking. Angela was gone, leaving only a scorched mark on the cave floor. Ethan was slumped against a rock, unconscious but breathing. I tried to stand, but my legs felt like jelly. I looked down at my palm. The mark was gone. The emerald was gone. I felt empty, cold, and utterly human again. "Ethan?" I whispered, crawling toward him. I reached out to touch his face, but as I did, I noticed something in the moonlight. My reflection in a nearby pool of water. My eyes weren't brown anymore. They weren't amber. They were a deep, glowing violet. And from the woods around the cave, a dozen figures in tactical black began to emerge. They weren't GSOA. And they weren't Council. They were wearing the logo of Angus Industries. One of them stepped forward, removing his helmet. It was the Council Elder, but he was wearing a lab coat under his tactical vest. "The extraction was a success," he said, looking at a tablet in his hand. "The human host has successfully filtered the emerald's toxins. The violet essence is now stable." He looked at me, a cold, clinical smile on his face. "Thank you for your service, Ms. Boris. The king will be told you died in the explosion. It's cleaner that way." He raised a tranquilizer rifle and fired. The last thing I saw before the world went black was Ethan's hand twitching, his fingers reaching for where I had been. Chapter 13. The Sterile Throne. Waking up was a slow, agonizing slide into a world that smelled of ozone and bleach. No wood smoke, no rain. No Ethan. My head felt like it had been hollowed out and stuffed with static, a dull throb pulsing behind my eyes in time with a rhythmic electronic beep. I tried to lift my hand to rub my face, but my wrist hit a cold, unyielding restraint. I snapped my eyes open. I wasn't in a cave. I was in a room that looked like a billionaire's fever dream of a surgical suite. Glass walls, white light so bright it felt like a physical weight, and enough monitors to track a space launch. I wasn't in a hospital bed. I was strapped into a reclined chair that felt like it belonged in a fighter jet. "Ah, the anomaly is awake, precisely on schedule." The voice came from a speaker in the ceiling. I looked up, squinting against the glare. Across the glass partition, the Council Elder, the man in the lab coat, was tapping away at a tablet. He looked disappointed, like I was a corrupted file he couldn't quite delete. "Where is Ethan?" I rasped, my throat feeling like I'd swallowed a handful of gravel. "If you've touched him, I will spend the rest of my life making yours a living hell, and I'm very good at research." "The king is being processed," the elder said, not looking up. "He's currently under the impression that you were vaporized in the explosion. A tragic loss for the linguistics department, truly, but a necessary one for the merger." "Merger?" I tugged at the restraints, the metal biting into my skin. "What the hell are you talking about? He's the king. You work for him." The elder finally looked at me, a thin, clinical smile stretching his lips. "We work for Angus Industries, Ms. Boris. Ethan is the CEO, yes, but the board of directors has always found his romantic attachments to be a liability. The mate test was our idea. A way to find a compatible genetic match to stabilize the corporate bloodline. We never expected a human to hack the system." "I didn't hack anything," I spat, my fierce energy beginning to simmer beneath the exhaustion. "The ring chose me. The heart of the North recognized me." The heart of the North is a high-density energy core, Vivian. It doesn't recognize anything. It seeks the most efficient conductor. You were a fluke of bioresonance. He walked closer to the glass. But you did something we didn't think possible. You filtered the emerald's raw output. Your blood is currently the most valuable substance on the planet. I looked down at my arms. The gold veins were gone, replaced by a deep, glowing violet that seemed to move beneath my skin like liquid neon. And it was beautiful and terrifying. "You're using me as a battery," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "A filter, actually," he corrected. "We're going to use your refined essence to stabilize the next generation of Lycan soldiers. No more berserkers. Just perfectly controlled, high-output warriors, all thanks to the girl who just wanted a passing grade." The door to the lab hissed open. A man walked in, his back to me. He was wearing a familiar charcoal suit, his shoulders broad and imposing. My heart leaped into my throat. "Ethan!" I cried out, my voice cracking. "Ethan! I'm here! They lied to you!" The man turned around. It was Ethan, but the look in his eyes made me wish I were still unconscious. They weren't amber. They were a flat, mechanical gray. He looked at me with the same interest he'd show a piece of lab equipment. "Subject 402 is conscious, Elder," Ethan said, his voice a perfect, emotionless drone. "Shall we begin the final extraction?" Chapter 14. The Grey King's Command. The sound of his voice, that low, velvet baritone I had grown to crave, speaking about me like a line item on a spreadsheet, felt like a stake through my heart. I stared at him, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "Ethan, it's Vivian," I whispered, my eyes searching his for even a flicker of the man who had kissed me in the foyer. "The discordant symphony, the girl who told you your ancient dialects were a mess. Look at me." Ethan didn't blink. He stepped closer to the glass, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked perfectly composed, perfectly professional, and entirely hollow. "The subject is attempting to use emotional triggers from the previous simulation. Recommendation: increase the neural dampeners." "Ethan, stop it!" I screamed, slamming my restrained hands against the arms of the chair. "This isn't a simulation. The GSOA, the bridge, the temple. That was real. You loved me." "Love is a chemical imbalance used to facilitate pair bonding in primitive social structures," Ethan replied, his voice devoid of any inflection. "It has been purged to ensure maximum operational efficiency. Elder, the board is waiting for the results." The elder nodded, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "You see, Ms. Boris? We didn't just break the bond, we optimized the king. He's exactly what the company needs now. A leader without the burden of fate." I felt a cold, sharp fury begin to rise, overriding the static in my brain. And they hadn't just taken me, they had lobotomized the soul of the man the man I was definitely going to have a very heated argument with if I ever got out of this chair. "You think you can just delete a person?" I growled, the violet light beneath my skin beginning to pulse with a low, thrumming hum. "You think you can turn a king into a middle manager and I'll just sit here and be your filter?" "I think you have no choice," the elder said, reaching for a lever on the console. "The extraction process is automated. It will take approximately 6 hours. By the end, you'll be back to being a perfectly normal human. Or, more likely, a perfectly empty shell. Either way, Angus Industries wins." He pulled the lever. A surge of white-hot agony ripped through my body. It felt like my very marrow was being siphoned out through my pores. I screamed, my back arching against the chair, the violet light in my veins flaring until the entire room was bathed in a haunting neon glow. Ethan watched me. He didn't flinch. He didn't move. He just watched the monitors, his gray eyes tracking my vitals as if he were watching a stock ticker. But then, something happened. In the middle of the pain, I felt a tiny microscopic spark. It wasn't in my palm. It wasn't in my veins. It was in the back of my mind. A sharp, sassy, defiant little voice that sounded exactly like me. Vivian Boris, if you let these guys in suits win, I am never letting you live this down. I stopped screaming. I clamped my jaw shut, the taste of copper filling my mouth. I ignored the pain and focused on that spark. I focused on the resonance. If I was the filter, that meant I controlled the flow. I didn't push the energy away. I pulled it back. I gripped the violet light in my mind and yanked it toward my heart, folding it over and over until it became a dense, vibrating knot of pure, unadulterated defiance. The monitors began to scream. The beeping turned into a solid, high-pitched whine. "What is she doing?" the elder barked, his fingers flying over the tablet. "The extraction is reversing. She's pulling the energy from the grid." Ethan's head tilted slightly to the side. For a fraction of a second, the gray in his eyes flickered, a tiny spark of amber appearing like a distant star. Subject is resisting. Theoretical impossibility. "Increase the output. Drain her," the elder yelled. "No," I whispered, my voice carrying a weight that cracked the glass partition. I looked Ethan dead in the eye. I didn't see a CEO, and I didn't see a gray drone. I saw the man who had dared to test me. "Ethan Angus," I said, my voice resonating with a power that made the floorboards vibrate. "Class is in session, and you're about to fail." I let go. I didn't blast the room. I blasted the bond. I sent every ounce of the violet energy straight through the psychic link they thought they had severed, hitting Ethan's mind with the force of 1,000 discordant symphonies. Ethan's eyes went wide. He collapsed to his knees, clutching his head as the gray film shattered, revealing the burning, molten amber beneath. He let out a roar, not a mechanical drone, but a raw, primal sound that shattered every glass panel in the room. The elder was thrown back by the pressure wave, his tablet smashing against the wall. I felt the restraints on my wrists snap like dry twigs. I stood up, and the violet light in my skin now a blinding, regal gold. I walked through the shattered glass, stepping over the elder without a second glance. I reached Ethan, who was trembling on the floor, his breathing ragged. I knelt beside him, my hand hovering over his heart. "Ethan?" I whispered. He looked up at me, his eyes clear, his face etched with a pain that was entirely human. "Vivian, I saw you die. I'm a fast learner," I said, a small, fierce smile touching my lips. "Now let's get out of here. We have a board of directors to fire." But as I helped him up, the doors to the lab didn't just open, they were sealed shut by thick silver shutters. And a voice, a cold, digital female voice, filled the room. "Protocol 9 initiated. Extraction failed. Incineration sequence beginning in T-minus 60 seconds." I looked at Ethan. He looked at the ceiling. "Ethan," I said, grabbing his hand, "tell me you have a back door for this." "I'm a CEO, Vivian," he said, his wolf beginning to surface in his eyes. "I always have a back door, but you're going to have to jump again." He pointed to a massive ventilation shaft in the ceiling. "You've got to be kidding me," I groaned. Chapter 15. The Final Grade. "A ventilation shaft?" "Ethan, I'm wearing a hospital gown and sheer spite. I am not crawling through a tin can while the room turns into a toaster." "Then I guess it's a good thing I'm the one doing the heavy lifting," Ethan growled, but the edge in his voice was tempered by that familiar, arrogant spark. He didn't wait for my rebuttal. He scooped me up, his muscles rippling with a strength that felt raw and unfiltered, and leaped. We didn't just reach the shaft. He tore the steel grating off with a single hand, shoving us into the cramped metallic darkness just as a hiss of incinerating gas flooded the lab below. The heat licked at my heels, a blistering reminder that Angus Industries didn't do peaceful resignations. We scrambled through the narrow tunnels, the sound of our breathing echoing against the galvanized steel. The boardroom is on the penthouse level, Ethan panted, his amber eyes cutting through the dark like twin lanterns. They think they've erased us. They're currently voting on the merger that will turn my pack into a private militia. Then we're crashing the meeting, I said, my fingers digging into his shoulder. And Ethan? If I'm going to be a queen, I'm not doing it from a throne. I'm doing it from the head of the table. We burst through the final vent, I dropping into the opulent, mahogany-scented air of the executive suite. The board of directors, 10 men and women in suits that cost more than my future, froze. The elder was there too, clutching a bandage to his forehead, his eyes widening in pure horror. "The anomaly!" he shrieked. "And the king! He's supposed to be neutralized." Neutralized? Ethan stepped forward, his presence expanding until the room felt small. He didn't shift. He didn't have to. The sheer weight of his authority, backed by the violet gold resonance hummed between us, brought the chairman to his knees without a single touch. "I'm the CEO, and you're all fired. Effective immediately." "You can't do that," the chairman gasped, clawing at his silk tie. "The bylaws." "I wrote the bylaws," Ethan countered, his voice a low, lethal vibration. "And Vivian just edited them." I stepped beside him, my hand locked in his. I felt the violet light in my veins settle into a calm, steady warmth. I looked at the elder, offering him a slow, saccharine smile. The mate test was a failure, remember? But the reboot? That worked perfectly. I've integrated your energy core into my own neural network. If you try to trigger Protocol 9 again, I'll take the entire Angus Tower down with me, and I'm very petty about my GPA. The room went silent. The board members scrambled for the exits, leaving only the elder who collapsed into a chair, his optimized future turning to ash. Ethan turned to me, his gaze softening. The mechanical gray was gone, replaced by a heat that made my skin tingle. "So, Ms. Boris, we have a company to restructure, a council to dissolve, and a world that's still a little too quiet." "And my linguistics degree?" I asked, leaning into his space. "You'll finish it," he whispered, pulling me into a kiss that tasted of victory and a very loud, very discordant future. "But I think you've already earned your doctorate in rebellion." I pulled back just enough to smirk. "Does that mean I get my own parking spot?" "Vivian," he groaned, "you own the building." I smiled, the gold light in my eyes reflecting the rising sun over the city. The test was over, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't just passing, I was setting the curve.